Welcome to the Modern Medicine Movement Podcast with Dr. Thomas Hemingway. Have you ever looked in the mirror and said to yourself, I thought I'd be healthier, in better shape, feel better both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and be further along in my life? If so, come on this journey with my dad as he explores all things health and wellness from a holistic medical perspective, even as a classically trained physician. He'll share integrative strategies to optimize health and inspire you to join the modern medicine movement.
Welcome to the Modern Medicine Movement Podcast. Dr. Thomas Hemingway here, and a big aloha from Hawaii. Nei. So grateful for you guys, for your support, for listening. Oh my gosh, I'm so pumped to be back sharing another podcast with you. I took a couple weeks off for just some crazy work shifts. I just cranked a bunch of shifts so that I could take the next week off to just spend with my lovely wife, who I've been married to for almost 24 years now. It's just incredible. We've been together for almost a quarter of a century. It's crazy. And we celebrated last week our anniversary, and it was amazing. We got to spend lots of time together, enjoy each other, and just have an amazing time. We also celebrated some of her work achievements and got to spend some time with some friends in a beautiful location, and just really took it easy for a little bit. So I didn't do any podcasting, and I hadn't that last week as well, been super active on social media, because you know what? Sometimes you just got to get unplugged. It's okay. As my wife and I often say, guess what? When we unplugged, we turned our phones off. I didn't podcast. I didn't post hardly anything. And guess what? Nobody died because of it. Isn't that amazing? I mean, as a physician, it's just incredible to have the opportunity to not be on call and to put the phone down and turn it off. It's just so refreshing and just really recharged my batteries. And so I'm pumped today to be able to share with you a new episode that something I've been thinking about for quite a long time now, and doing a lot of research and reading and just getting tons of information, and I'll share some of it with you today. I'll try to incorporate some of it into the show notes, some interesting articles and things, and I'm just pumped and I'm grateful. I'm really grateful for you guys that are listening and sharing and getting value from this podcast of how you can live better, healthier, fuller lives with health of your body, your mind, your soul, and it's just awesome stuff. I'm so humbled. We've had so many thousands of downloads, and I am just humbled by you guys. So thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you. If you have not already left me a review, especially on Apple Podcasts, please do so. I know there's lots of you out there that haven't done it yet, and please do it. It's super simple. Scroll down on the show. Once you go to show Modern Medicine Movement, at the bottom of the episodes you'll see the 5 stars. Click on the one farthest to the right, and then there's a little square with like a pencil on it, and you click on that icon, and that allows you to type in a little bit of text. Just tell me what you're loving, what you're liking about the podcast. It's super awesome to read these. I'm going to read you one right now. In fact, we'll call it the Review of the Week. It's entitled, I Could Listen to These All Day. I love this, from Lynn KX. She gives 5 stars and says, quote, I appreciate all the knowledge Dr. Hemingway shares, and for not overwhelming his audience with terminology he doesn't explain. Every single one of these is beneficial, and I would recommend everyone to listen. Oh, thanks, and God bless the doctor and his family, exclamation point. Thank you so much, Lynn. I so appreciate that. So pumped for you guys for sharing. And also, I have a new Facebook group that's free, and I pretty much accept just about everybody universally that would like to be a part of this, as long as they fill out the thing, answer the membership questions, say that they'll be kind and follow the rules, all that good stuff, and we'll share there. I go live there. I make posts there. It's called the Modern Medicine Movement Health and Wellness Facebook group. You're welcome to join that and get some additional content there. I'll also go live there, usually once a week or so. In fact, tonight I went live and I shared it with this group, and it's actually on the topic we're going to talk about, which is awesome. And it's something that, it didn't used to be really talked about. And honestly, growing up, I had no idea what this concept was, at least as it's delineated in the terminology that we have today. And so we'll talk about this and how it pertains to us, the world around us. And so without further ado, let's jump into it. We're going to talk primarily about one aspect of what I like to call, and many others, you've probably heard the buzzword, regenerative agriculture. Regenerative. And part of this cycle, this is basically how we can basically get our soil, our environment back to how it used to be thousands and thousands of years ago, when the soil was a deep, rich, dark, black color, full of just amazing nutrients and minerals and vitamins and, bacteria and all the things that we need for our best health, our microbiome, ours, the plants and animals around us. It was a beautiful, beautiful cycle. And unfortunately, in the last, couple hundred years, we've really screwed this up with things like monocrop agriculture, where we just plant the same stinking corn or soy over and over and over again, and it just depletes the soil of its resources, of its vitamins and minerals. And even if it's done, quote unquote, organically, these, vegetables or plants, if you will, can actually be very deplete of lots of important vitamins and minerals that they used to have because they would get them from the soil. And now our soil is often depleted from this monocrop fashion, from erosion, just all this that we have used in recent, decades and centuries to do what we thought was good agriculture, right? We've learned how to get lots more bang for the buck, so to speak. We've used, genetically modified seeds. We've used all sorts of herbicides, pesticides, whatever, to be able to preferentially grow whatever we're growing on our field. And guess what? There are ramifications or downstream effects to all of this. And today I'm going to focus on one small aspect of all of this, and it's something that gives back, if done properly, to the regenerative agriculture, and it's the subject of grass-fed, grass-finished livestock. And primarily we're talking about beef primarily. If you guys have ever recently gone to the store and looked for, a beef either steak or hamburger or even a beef hot dog. Heck, I didn't used to for years eat any hot dogs because the quality was so stinking poor. And then recently there have been a couple of companies that have really focused on grass-fed and finished beef 100% hot dogs. Like, holy crap, not just the beef hot dogs that you can find out there that, are okay, but 100% grass-fed and grass-finished hot dogs. So I eat hot dogs every now and then, and it's from, one of the couple of companies out there. This one happens to be Tetons Waters Ranch, which I'm not getting any kickback from them or anything, at least at this point. Maybe they'll sponsor my show in the future because, I think they've done a great job really living up to the grass-fed and finished goals that we'll talk about here. So in any case, I sometimes and often say, we are what we eat. And this couldn't be more true with respect to the meat that we may eat, or beef. And, this applies to the plants as well. I'm very much an omnivore. I love my veggies. I love my fruits. I love beef so much. In fact, tonight we grilled up, and it wasn't, because of the podcast or anything, but we just tend to grill at least twice a week. We grill, and we actually grilled 2 days in a row because, my kids all love it. I love it. and just happened to be what we had around. And so last night we had tri-tip, grass-fed, grass-finished. Tonight we had bison burgers, 100% grass-fed and finished. And this does matter. So we'll get into it a little bit. We'll kind of define a couple of terms so that we can kind of understand what all this is about. And at the end of the day, no matter what you eat, be it plant, animal, or both, we as humans, we're omnivores. We are omnivores, which means we are capable of eating plants and animals. In fact, for millennia, that's what we've done. Basically, in societies, way older than us, we've always eaten a combination of both plants and animals. And that's what we were designed for, the stomach that we have, which is not 4-part stomach like the herbivores that we'll talk about in this podcast, the ruminants, if you will. Ours is only a 1-part stomach. And guess what? If we went out to the fields and we tried to chew on a bunch of grass and get some nutrients out of there, guess what? We could not do it. We would not get any nutrients out of that grass. We're not set up to eat it. We don't have the 4-part stomach like the ruminants, cows primarily, have. And so it does matter at the end of the day what we eat, whether we're using plant or animals in our diet, how they were cultivated matters. If we're having, beef in our burgers or hamburgers, tacos, stew, or having a grill, with some steak like I did last night, whatever it is, it would be super, super naive to think that it doesn't matter how we source this meat, because honest to goodness truth, whatever that, meat had when it was alive to eat, whether it be grass-fed and finished or grass-fed in the beginning like they all are, and then grain-finished and feedlot finished, it actually makes a big, big difference. And we'll get into that because the foods that we eat get incorporated into us, into our bodies, even down into the very cellular level. And so it does matter. It does matter. So let's step back a little bit. In general, in the U.S., we'll talk about, I have some stats here. We tend to eat a decent amount of meat. As of 2018, the U.S. Department of Agriculture projected that the average person would consume over 200 pounds of all the meats that are common, chicken, pork, steak, or beef, by the end of the year. And so that's more than a half a pound of this combination a day, which actually I'm willing to submit that if we source it properly, it's important. It's good. It's good to have meat in your diet because it has a lot of important nutrients that you can't get easily from plants, especially nowadays because the soil is so depleted of nutrients. And so there's a place for meat. In fact, the most common deficiency of vegans or vegetarians out there is B12 deficiency, which you can't really get from plants, at least not to the level that we need it in our body. So you'll definitely have to supplement if you don't have any meat in your diet. So think about that. It's found in animal meat, primarily steak, also organ meat, liver, kidneys, things like that have a higher percentage of these nutrients, minerals that we need. And so at the end of the day, just remember, as I said at the outset, we are what we eat. It's important to source our both plant and animals correctly and in the proper form. And so not all meat, for that matter, is created equally, right? One of the most important factors that determines the overall quality of, let's talk about, the meat or beef, the red meat, which is sometimes referred to as basically a superfood, the original superfood, if you will, that our ancestors certainly partook of every day that they were able to go on a hunt and get some. And it's the dietary patterns of this livestock that makes the quality. And it really, really makes sense, right? The food an animal consumes, that food is used by them for their bodies to grow and develop, and ultimately becomes the food that we consume. So if we feed cattle instead of the grass-fed and finished, pasture lands that they were supposed to be eating for millennia, if we in turn decide we're going to throw them into a cramped space in a feedlot and feed them grains or corn or soy or candy for that matter, we'll talk about this later on. It's like legit. A lot of farmers buy leftovers, out of date candies and sugars and things that they can't sell to people anymore because it's out of date. They buy them at a super, super, super low cost, even much lower than it would be to feed them grass or to even feed them corn or soy. Like legit, they have, and many continue to feed them all types of garbage, including candy, including Skittles, including sprinkles that would end up on your donuts or cakes or whatever. And so you can imagine that if you feed these cattle nutrient poor things like what I just mentioned, or corn or soy that's largely GMO processed and grown, it'll in turn produce a nutrient poor food source, right? Compared to that is generated from the cattle that are in their natural environment, which is with the pasture lands. They're grazing and eating what they're supposed to eat, grass. So the adage, as mentioned, you are what you eat, not only pertains to us, but it pertains to cattle too. Let's talk about them. And they fall into a class of animals that are called ruminants. Do you guys know what it means to ruminate? How we just kind of let something, settle for a long period of time. Well, a ruminant is a mammal that eats and digests plant-based food, like grass, for example, and it does it over and over and over and over again, at least 4 times, right? They have a 4-part stomach. So ruminants are animals which are herbivores, by definition, with a complex stomach. Okay, it's this 4-part stomach. It's called a rumen. And some examples of these ruminants are, like I mentioned, the cattle or the beef, cows, also sheep, goats, buffalo, bison. Remember the bison burger I had tonight for dinner? From a ruminant, grass-fed, grass-finished, deer, elk, giraffes, and camels. These are ruminants. And one of the most significant features of these ruminants in their digestive system is that they don't have just the one simple stomach that we have. It's a 4-part stomach. And they are called the rumen, the reticulum, the omasum, and the abomasum. And you don't have to remember that. But the first 3 components, the rumen, reticulum, and omasum, they break down plant fibers by fermentation. They sit there for a long time with the help of microorganisms, with their microbiome, the microflora. This fermentation results in fatty acids like acetate, butyrate, propionate, and this is all part of the foregut fermentation. And then the 4th compartment of the stomach secretes the digestive enzymes. So these ruminant animals, they chew and chew and chew, digest, regurgitate, over and over and over again in this 4-part stomach system. And that's how they are able to effectively break down plant matter, the cellulose, right, in plants, which we as humans, we just can't do it. We can't do it. Our stomach is not set up to do that. We, the non-ruminants, we're omnivores like me, or carnivores like some, or other animals like, lions, tigers, whatever. They have a single stomach like we do within their digestive system. And so our digestive system, or all of the non-ruminants like us, it's called a monogastric. In other words, we have one stomach. And so here's some examples. Besides us, we have birds, have a 1-part stomach, dogs, rabbits, lions, tigers, horses, swine. These are the non-ruminants, and they can be omnivores or typically omnivores or carnivores for the most part. And we have the 1-part stomach, right, that is preceded by our mouth, our esophagus, and then after the stomach comes the small and the large intestine. So we are different than the ruminants, okay? They chew and chew and chew, regurgitate, chew and chew some more. It goes in and out of their 4-part stomach. And we just have a simple 1-part stomach, right? And so they are able to digest the plants, the grasses, through their complex stomach system. And we are not. They also have a different pattern in their teeth. We have, as humans, and most carnivores, omnivores, have 4 sharp canines. Those are those teeth on either end of our front teeth out there that are kind of almost pyramid shaped. And they are precisely designed for chewing up, biting into, meat. And the ruminants don't have that. They only have 2 canines, and they tend to be blunt, not sharp. And then actually, what's interesting, you guys have probably seen this and maybe didn't really think much of it, but the molars of ruminants, they move laterally, right? Whereas in the non-ruminants like us or carnivores and omnivores tend to move vertically. We open our mouths up and down. We have that hinge joint of our temporal mandibular joint, or TMJ. Whereas the ruminants, their jaw goes sort of in and out, or sideways, if you will, lateral movement to grind and grind and grind and grind the grass, because it takes a lot of grinding, as we mentioned. Very, very different process. So pretty interesting. I mean, there's lots of cool stuff. Even the saliva of ruminants doesn't have the carbohydrate digestive enzymes that we have in our mouths, because they don't have the same carbohydrate and diet that we have. They don't need the same digestive enzymes in their saliva. And as mentioned, the ruminants, have this regurgitation process where the food goes back and forth between this 4-part stomach to be able to get these complex plant fibers digested, right? The cellulose, as I mentioned earlier. So pretty interesting. As one might expect, the ruminant animals take a much longer time to digest the plants, right? Hence this 4-part stomach. And it takes hours and hours and hours, right? And they're able to digest that cellulose, which we as humans cannot. And so at the end of the day, they ruminate or chew and regurgitate, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth in this 4-part stomach called rumination. And then we as humans don't do that, right? We have a 1-part stomach, and our food goes through it much quicker. And whereas they can digest that plant matter, the cellulose, we cannot. We were just not designed to. We have a totally different process. And so, as expected, these ruminants are designed to eat not grain, not Skittles or sprinkles. They're designed to eat grass, and they were made to do that. That's when they are at their healthiest. That's what they're supposed to eat. And so the healthiest kind of meat, if we're going to buy beef, is the grass-fed and grass-finished. And we'll talk a little bit more about what all this entails. But, if you think about it, that's what they did for millennia, right? They always were basically fed the grass of the land, right? They roamed about, they pasture grazed, and our ancestors would go on a hunt to either kill a bison, or a buffalo, or a cow, cattle, whatever, sheep, goat. All these ruminants, they would go out and get them on their hunts, and they were great sources of not only healthy meat, but they were replete with lots of vitamins and minerals because they were on the diet that they were supposed to be on. They were grazing, and they were also contributing to the regenerative agriculture, that we might say, to the health of the land, because when cattle and bison and sheep and goats, they eat the grass, they roam around, they graze, they poop in the grass, and this cycles around, they actually will put, or sequester is the fancy word for kind of trapping carbon into the land, into the soil. So actually, if animals are allowed to do their natural diet and their natural pattern, which is to graze freely and eat grasses, you will actually be not only carbon neutral, but you will actually be sequestering carbon in the soil, which is amazing, because a lot of times there's this argument by certain groups that are, either vegetarian or vegan, that, you can't eat meat because meat contribute to all the greenhouse gases. And that's not really true unless they're being basically feedlot treated, and they're shoved into pens with lots and lots of other, cows, and they don't have any room to graze around, and they're just farting up a storm, right, producing methane because they're eating all kinds of garbage foods. Then in that case, they do tend to increase some greenhouse gases because they're not on their appropriate diet and they're not doing their appropriate normal stuff. They are not grazing. But if we allow our animals to do the natural thing, to graze in pasture land and to eat grass, both from birth, after they finished, being breastfed, if you will, drinking the milk from their mothers. After that, they're raised only on grass. They actually improve their carbon footprint. They improve greenhouse gases because the carbon is actually trapped in the soil, in the land, if we do this correctly. So that shouldn't be an argument to not eat meat, especially if you are looking for the healthiest meat out there with respect to the beef, if you will, is the grass-fed and finished, or all the ruminants that you may or may not eat should be grass-fed and finished. This is the proper way. This is the way nature intended it. This is what's been going on for millennia. And this allows, not only the animals to be at their healthiest, but the plants as well, because the soils will contain lots of vitamins and minerals and nutrients, and they won't get depleted from things like monocrop farming, etc. So both the plants and the animals benefit from this practice. And this is the whole sort of buzzword practice of regenerative agriculture. So it's dynamic. It's what happens when pasture land is exactly that, pasture land. So the other thing, if you're letting animals graze and run free, if you will, and eat grasses, they rarely get sick. They're not all cramped up in tight quarters in these feedlot scenarios where they tend to get sick. Not only sick because they're eating a crappy, unnatural diet, but they're getting sick from overcrowding. Diseases are spread and transferred so much more quickly. And that is way more common in these feedlot scenarios, which is unfortunately way, way, way too common. And so what do? In these feedlot scenarios, well, they give them a bunch of garbage to eat and antibiotics. They often give them antibiotics and hormones. And so when we buy these non-grass-fed and finished, meats, we will get downstream some of those antibiotics and hormones, which is not a good thing. It jacks with us. It jacks with our microbiome, and there's all sorts of issues. And so don't support the feedlot cattle or the so-called CAFOs or CAFOs. CAFOs, that's kind of a buzzword that just means concentrated animal feeding operations. The CAFOs, don't support them, because not only is it inferior quality meat, but actually there's other crap in there, most likely, which are, like I mentioned, antibiotics and hormones. So you got to pay attention. And one of the sources I read said that nearly a quarter of all of our nation, the U.S. we're talking about, a quarter of all of our medically important antibiotics in our country, 25% of all these antibiotics are given to cattle. Really? To cattle? If they are raised properly on pasture land, grass-fed and finished, they almost never need antibiotics. But if they're in this feedlot scenario, they're getting pumped full of antibiotics. So that's that's a problem. So here's a thing to think about. Sometimes a label might just say grass-fed, and unfortunately that claim may be misleading. Hopefully the company is being honest and they mean that they've been fed grass for life, but actually they could be a feedlot animal, because everybody in the beginning feeds their cattle what they're supposed to eat, right? They start with their mother's milk, and then they go to grass, and basically all cattle do this in the first 6 to 9 months of life. Even those that later are transferred to the feedlot situation and fed all kinds of grains and garbage and junk foods and whatever, they all started being grass-fed. So just looking at a grass-fed label may not be enough. You really want it to say 100% grass-fed and grass-finished. You would love it to say that, because grass-fed, technically speaking, some of these farmers, some of these companies will stretch it, and they'll say, oh, it's grass-fed, although it was feedlot finished. And so grain finished, garbage food finished, because why? Because it's more economical. Not only does it cost way less to feed them garbage, but they can use less land, right? They just cramp them all up in these CAFOs, right? Or these feedlot scenarios, and so they take up less space. They eat cheaper food, and they actually grow and fatten up way quicker. They are basically taken to slaughter between 24 and 48 months, whereas the grass-fed and finished take at least 36 if not 48 months, or in other words, an extra year or two, or maybe even a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, an extra couple of years to get to their mature state where they're ready to go and be taken and processed for the steaks that some of us may enjoy. And so not only is it economical for these farmers, because the food is cheaper if they're not grass-fed and finished, but they need less real estate and they fatten them up quicker. So it has all of these things that are sort of, attractive, right, for the farmer, because they can get more out of a smaller space. They can, feed them more cheaply, and so we have to reward those that do it right. Oftentimes we say we vote with our wallet. Well, that's the case here, because if we only buy grass-fed and finished, then those feedlot cattle nobody's going to buy it, and then they're going to be forced to change their ways and to improve them such that they start doing the proper thing, which is the grass-fed and grass-finished approach. Because that not only helps us to be healthier, it also helps the cattle, it helps the ecosystem. If we want to get into the humane treatment of cattle and animals, think about it. This is a way more humane way to do it, to do the grass-fed and finished, because they get to roam, they get to do their thing, they get to be in pasture, they get to be running loose, they get to be eating their native grass diet. And so it's a way more humane way to treat animals. And so I'm all for that too. I think that, sometimes people like to go at each other for, vegan versus carnivore versus omnivore, whatever, and they get all crazy with one another. And I'm all about the humane treatment of all animals, even those that end up on my dinner table. I think if they have the opportunity in life to be part of this system that we talked about, this regenerative agriculture system, it's so important that they are one with the land, that they're able to graze there, eat the grass that was their diet for millennia, poop on the ground, and regenerate the soil, trap the carbon in there. If they're able to do that, that's also a way more humane way to treat them. I mean, if you saw videos on YouTube of these feedlot cattle being, stuck in these small pens and fed garbage, I mean, it would just break your heart. And I do not agree with that in any way, and I do not support it. And so I look when I go to the grocery store or to my local market, and I only buy the grass-fed and finished, because that's not only better for me, better for my health, but it's also better for the environment. And so when they've looked at this, as I mentioned, this whole regenerative cycle, the soil improves when you allow animals to pasture raise and to be able to poop on the ground, etc. I mean, it's the healthiest soils in the world are basically part of these regenerative agriculture sites, where you have farms like Belcampo, White Oak Pastures, where they basically let their animals roam free and eat the grass that they're supposed to. And it also, as I mentioned, it's good for greenhouse gas because it traps it in the soil or sequesters it. And that doesn't happen with the feedlot cattle. So super important to, vote with our wallets, to be able to only choose those meats that are, grass-fed, grass-finished. That means that they basically had grass their entire life, not just in the beginning, but their entire life, right? We don't want to support the grain-fed and grain-finished meats, because not only are they less healthy for us, but it's also, it's not humane. It's a lot of stress on the animals, right? Putting them all in these small pens and giving them antibiotics, giving them hormones. It's all unnatural, super unnatural, and it's not humane, and it's just, it's not healthy, not for them, not for us. So that's why we should choose grass-fed and grass-finished over the conventional beef that come from the feedlot. And I'm going to dive into this a little bit more. I think it's important because the nutritional value of this meat, of the beef, is, as I mentioned at the outset, it's affected by their diet, right? Now, grass-fed and grain-fed will both have, proteins and have some iron, but the grass-fed ones typically are healthier, and they have more nutrients because they're getting it from that diet they're supposed to be getting from healthy soil. and they tend to be a much healthier meat that is actually easier to digest. And if you've had them both and you compared them side by side blindfolded, I'd be willing to bet that the overwhelming majority of us also agree that the grass-fed and finished beef tastes way better. Not only that, but nutritionally, they're way better for us. Remember this thing I talked about a few podcasts ago, this omega-3 versus omega-6 fatty acids. So omega-3, just remember the number 3, 1, 2, 3. This is what we would rather have the majority of. If we could have in our diet omega-3 fatty acids, twice as many as the omega-6, which is the linoleic acid. Omega-6 means they have much more double bonds, right? 6 versus 3. And those, the omega-6s, tend to be higher in the grain-feds, which is bad because you don't want a whole bunch of omega-6s. You'd rather have a preponderance of omega-3s, which are higher in proportion in the grass-fed ones because they're getting their natural normal diet. Sometimes even the grain finished animals are fed all sorts of garbage, not only like soy and corn, which is not part of their normal diet, but sometimes they're just fed these seed oils in their diet, canola, cottonseed, and here's the reason, right? It goes back to economics. It's super cheap. They can put it in their food. It fattens them up super quickly, so they take up less time on the farm, right? They can fatten them up in 24 months, send them to slaughter, and put them on your table. Whereas if you're doing the grass-fed and finish, it could take several years. So the farmers do this because some of them, they're just, they're at their wits' end. They're just trying to make a buck like everybody else, and they unfortunately keep doing it because we, the consumer, keeps buying it. We want the cheapest beef around, and I'm telling you, it's worth it to spend the extra $2 or $3 a pound and get the stuff that's actually raised properly, the grass-fed and grass-finished. Let me just give you an example. So we talked about this before, this whole business of the oils, right? The seed oils, which tend to contain a lot of the linoleic acid, and that's just one of the most common omega-6 fatty acids, and these tend to be way more pro-inflammatory than the omega-3s, which are like alpha linolenic acid, for example, which are good for brain health, right? They're good for our mental health. If we have a good proportion of them, the 3s versus 6s in our diets, we'll have less mental health issues, tend to have less neurodegenerative disorders, less things like ADHD. All these things can be benefited by having more omega-3s in our diet, whereas if our diet has a lot of omega-6s, which is the nasty linoleic acid, which is unfortunately super high in these seed oils. Like, for example, let me throw out a couple. Sunflower oil, right? If you see that on the label, don't buy it. Sunflower oil has 71% omega-6, or the linoleic acid. Corn oil, 57% linoleic acid, omega-6. This is not what you want. Soybean oil, 54%. Cottonseed oil, 54% of the linoleic or the omega-6. Remember from my podcast on the seed oils that the problem here with the omega-6 is it's more polyunsaturated, and it is way more prone to oxidation and causing increased inflammation in the body. So if we are consuming products with these seed oils, and like I said, this beef that has the high component of omega-6, the proportion of omega-6 is much higher than omega-3. The beef that have been fed this garbage, either corn or soy or these oils or, heaven forbid, candies like Skittles, whatever, they tend to have more omega-6s in them, and that is way more prone to inflammation. Back to my cholesterol and lipids podcast, we talked about this. The polyunsaturated fatty acids, especially the omega-6s and 9s, for example, they tend to cause inflammation and to be oxidized and tend to cause things like, what? You guessed it, the most common cause of death worldwide, heart disease. They tend to cause and contribute to cancer. They contribute to the neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, etc., the dementias by this omega-6 preponderance in our diet. And if we were to step back 50, 60, 100 years ago, there was almost no omega-6 in our diet because these are found in all these processed foods. I mean, it's crazy. Let's just go back maybe 50 or 60 years, we had less than 7% of the linoleic acid in us, because remember I said this incorporates into our bodies. So in 1960, we had about 7% total of omega-6 in our body fat, linoleic acid. Okay? In the year 2010, we had almost 25% of omega-6 or linoleic acid in our body. And that's not a good thing. That is not a good thing. So we have tripled, or more than a 200% increase. We have tripled the amount of omega-6 in our bodies. This is crazy. No wonder why we're dying from heart disease and cancer at such a young age, and more of us than ever before, because we're getting it wrong. We're getting these things in our diet, all these seed oils, for example, all this garbage food. It's not a good thing. It is not a good thing. Now, in contradistinction, the saturated fats, like from butter, for example, how much omega-6 does it have of this linoleic acid? It only has 3%. What about coconut oil that I always talk about, how it's a better oil? It's also primarily saturated, and it only has 2% of linoleic acid. So 25 times less than soybean oil or cottonseed oil or corn oil, or 30 times less or more of omega-6 than sunflower oil. Remember, that was up to 71% omega-6. Holy crap! Coconut oil is only 2% of the bad oil, okay? Gosh, what about the other ones I talk about? Butterfat, I said, was only 3%. What else? Olive oil is only 9%. Okay, so we want to focus on these natural oils that are saturated. Fat and lard and butter and coconut oil, etc. Olive oil is way better than these other oils that have so many PUFAs or omega-6, because these are prone to inflammation. Sorry to spend so much time on this, but I think it is so important, because it is literally one of the biggest differences between why nowadays we are dying in greater numbers from heart disease than any other thing. Because look at our diet. Look at the percentage of these omega-6s in our body. It's up, triple from what it was 50 or 60 years ago. Remember I said it was only 7% of our body fat was these omega-6s, and now it's 23 to 25%. This is a huge change, and primarily it corresponds with eating less lard and natural fat, less butter, less lard, and more of these seed oils. I mean, it's crazy. Way back in the day when we didn't have these highly processed oils, our diet was different, and we had more omega-3s, right? And this is good for our body. It's good for our brain. Has so many health benefits. The omega-3s, as I talked about, in kids it does as well. It decreases ADHD, decreases heart disease, decreases problems with joint destruction or arthritis. I mean, so many things. And if we jump back a few thousand years, right, the hunter-gatherers, they ate basically the grass-fed and finished animals. And, some of them who ate lots of seafood, like the Inuit, had mostly omega-3 in their diet. They had 4-to-1 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. We, in our crappy diet, we're something like 25-to-1 omega-6 versus omega-3. So we've got it all wrong. It's so crazy. I mean, it depends on what sources. I'd say the average, depending on where you live, is probably 16-to-1 omega-6, which is horrible. You'd like to have it closer to 1-to-1 omega-3 to omega-6, or even 2-to-1 omega-3 to omega-6, because omega-3 is so much more helpful and less inflammatory, and will lead to less cancer, less heart disease, less chronic illness, less insulin resistance. And we got to change this, because as I mentioned previously, we are what we eat. So if we eat these seed oils and these pro-inflammatory things like soybean oils and corn oils, canola oils, it incorporates ultimately into our body fat. Or if we eat the animals that eat these things, right? And so super important, grass-fed, grass-finished beef also not only has a better ratio of omega-3 to omega-6, but also has much larger amounts of vitamin E and vitamin A, as well as more iron, more potassium, more phosphorus, more sodium, more zinc than grain-fed beef. This has all been shown, and it's not surprising, right? The grain-fed not only gets grain like corn and soy, but it gets all kind of crap. And it's pretty embarrassing. I did some fact checking, but it's actually legit. And I'll put one of the sources in there just because it really highlights this huge problem. And that is that, unfortunately, the grain-fed can literally have anything in the world in their diet. And a lot of it is legit just garbage, right? I mean, this one that I'll put in the show notes it's almost, I mean, it's hard to believe. It's like super crazy because, I mean, who would have ever thought that legit these animals are being fed things like gummy worms or Skittles or chocolate milk, powder, or marshmallows or sprinkles or whatever, in addition to corn and soy, and legit it's been going on for decades and decades. Why? Because it's cheaper. Let me give you an example. So as the price of corn or soy, rises, these farmers that are desperate, they have access to all this other junk stuff, right? Junk candies and things that are almost given away, and they can get them for cheap. They fatten them up, and they become sort of the fodder for the cows, so to speak. Let's give you an example. Corn back in 2009 was going for about $315 a ton. The sprinkles that would end up on your cakes or donuts or whatever could be as cheap as $150 a ton. So half the price of corn were these chocolate or whatever kind of colored sprinkles they are. And so they would buy them instead of the corn. And mind you, the corn is not even a good diet for the cows in the first place. They're supposed to eat grass, okay? And so, they just did whatever they could find. Some of these farmers, they were desperate. This one guy, well, I'll just give you his name because it's mentioned in the article, Mike Yoder, which is a farmer in Indiana. He feeds his cows candy, hot chocolate mix, crumbled cookies, breakfast cereal, trail mix, dried cranberries, orange peelings, ice cream sprinkles, and they're blended in with the other things like corn and hay and whatever else he threw in there. He blends it all into this sort of junk food that he would give his cows because it's cheaper, number one, and it fattens them up much quicker. This sugar fattens them up legit a full year faster than any of the typical foods that they're supposed to eat, which are the grasses, right? It's crazy. And so we got to be careful. We got to look and see what these animals are eating. One of the probably the simplest things to do is if you have in your community some farms that do allow grazing and grass-fed and finished livestock, buy them from a local farm. That's what I do. I can go to my local market just down the street, and I can actually buy from local farms where I can actually see the cows grazing, and I know that that's what they're being fed. And not only do I love to support my local economy, but I love to know that I'm putting the best things into my body. So it's so important to pay attention to this. And like I said, the reasons are myriad, but our health is, I think, so important. The grass-fed and finished is much more nutritious, as I mentioned, because of the lower levels of omega-6 and the higher levels of the omega-3, the higher levels of the vitamins E and A and iron, as I mentioned. They also have a higher level of carotenoids, which make the fat a little bit more yellow. The carotenoids are super awesome antioxidants. They also are good for eye health. They have many nutrients. And it just, frankly, it tastes better. Like, if you just want to taste some amazing beef tonight, I cooked up for my kids, 100% grass-fed and finished bison burgers. And I made these, I pounded them out, I put them into patties, I added some of my secret sauce, some spice that I like to throw in there, some diced onions, and they were stinking amazing. better burgers than I've ever had at any restaurant, any place in the world. I make right up at home. Very simple, grass-fed, grass-finished, and they just stinking taste better. They're delicious. So it's better for your taste buds, better for the cows, better for the environment, and better for your body. I mean, how could you go wrong? Yeah, I get it. It's a little bit more expensive, but the price will go down if we vote with our wallet. If we vote with our wallet and we buy grass-fed and finished, we'll be healthier, right? We're not putting in these junk foods into our bodies, the junk fats, the antibiotics, the hormones. You know, we're basically putting in a healthier beef. The cows are treated more humanely. Greenhouse gas lessens because the carbon is sequestered into the soil. So it's a win-win for everybody, for us, for the farmers, because we're supporting them. The price will go down, and also the environment will get healthier. If you've ever been to one of these farms where they do this, grass-fed and finished, you take a little shovel and you look at the soil, the deepest, richest colors you've ever seen. It is regenerative. It is the way it was meant to be. You know, it's incredible. It's incredible. And when you look at it, there's a lot of data to support it, and I'll put this in the show notes. The beef is healthier. They're treated more humanely. They have higher omega-3s. They're just more full of vitamins and nutrients. They're less, antibiotics, almost no antibiotics really in these grass-fed and finished. And it's the way it was supposed to be. It's the way it was designed. And so pay attention to the labels out there. You want to look for grass-fed and grass-finished. Also, if you want to look even closer, there's the American Grass-Fed Approved logo, or the AGA. There's also a Food Alliance certification, because this is a tricky one. If you just buy a meat that says it's organic, that's not enough, because organic meat may not be grass-finished. Just because it says organic, the cows could be eating organic corn. Right? They can bend and twist all this. So organic beef in and of itself is just not enough. Not enough. The best label you could look for is grass-fed and grass-finished. That is what you want. That will be more healthy for you. It's going to taste way better. It's better for the world. It's better for our environment. It decreases the carbon footprint. I could go on and on and on and on, just like the cattle do in their 4-part stomach, and they ruminate over and over and over and over again. Also, I didn't mention this, but as far as the regenerative agriculture aspect, not only does it trap the carbon into the soil and decrease the carbon footprint, decrease the greenhouse gas in the grass-fed and finished manner of raising them, but also you use much less water, because the soil will hold the water. And then if you want to use this soil, literally it will hold 20 to 30,000 gallons per acre. It gets increased, I should say. It increases the holding capacity by 30,000 gallons per acre. So there's less erosion, there's less water loss. I mean, people that don't understand this, I like to poo-poo those that eat meat, because they say, oh my gosh, it's bad for the environment. If it's done correctly, grass-fed and finished, it is not bad for the environment. This has been shown over and over and over again. There's lots of books that talk about this. And I can provide some resources in the show notes, but it's, if done properly, grass-fed and finished in a regenerative agricultural process, that's what we want. It's not only good for the cattle because they're treated humanely, it's good for us because we'll get the highest quality beef, and it's stinking good for the environment. So how can you go wrong? It just makes so much sense. And my favorite part is it tastes so much better. So how can you go wrong, right? So the next time you're in the grocery store, you got to look at the labels, try to get the grass-fed and finished. If I'm going to buy hot dogs, I'm only buying Teton Waters Ranch because they have grass-fed and finished, and they taste amazing. I'm buying local beef that's grass-fed from farms that I know and trust right here in Hawaii. I can see the cattle. They're grazing. They're doing their thing. They're eating the grass. They're pooping. They're trapping that carbon into the soil, decreasing the carbon footprint, improving the greenhouse gases, and they're free and they're roaming and they're healthy, and it's the humane way to go. So support your local grass-fed and finished farm and have the best. If you like to eat meat like I do, you'll have the best meat of your life. I kid you not. The bison burgers I make, if you have a chance to try that, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Grass-fed and finished, the best tasting burger you'll ever have. You can even use the meat for tacos or whatever you like to do with your beef that's ground, and it's amazing. I've never had better ground beef bison burgers. Also steaks, the marbling, that yellowish color from the carotenoids, it's amazing. Looks cool, and you can be so much, you feel better because you're eating it good, your environment is safer, and that's all I have. Grass-fed and finished, guys. A big aloha from Hawaii.